Okay, so next let's look at the Hebrew Bible on Isaiah 53 verses 7 through 12. So everyone get out your Hebrew Bible and open up Isaiah 53 verses 7 through 12, and here are the verses. Okay, so let's read through, and we're splitting them right down the middle, verse 7 to 9 and then 10 to 12. Okay, so let's read and see what Isaiah has to say here in verses 7 through 9. So it says, Nigas v'hu na'aneh v'lo yiftach panav, kaseh latavach yuval, uchrachel lifnei gozea ne'elama v'lo yiftach piv. Okay, so he was oppressed, he was afflicted, he did not open his mouth, like a lamb led to the slaughter. Okay, and like a sheep that is silent before its shearers. Okay, right here. And so he did not open his mouth. Okay, so these, okay, let me go on verse 8 and 9. Okay, it says, Ma'otzer u mimishpat lukach ve'et doro mi yesocheach ki nigzar me'eretz chaim mi pesha ami nega lamo. Okay, and by oppression and judgment he was taken away, and for his generation who considered that he was cut off from the land of the living, for the transgressions of my people, and to whom the stroke was due. And then Vayiten et reshaim kivru ve'et asir bemotav all lo chamas asa velo mirma befiv. Okay, and his grave was assigned with wicked men. He was with a rich man in his death because he had done no violence. Okay, you note that Hamas here means violence, right? That's Hamas, right? Violence. Okay, and nor was there any deceit in his mouth. Okay, so these verses 7 through 9 from Isaiah 53, they are rich in imagery and symbolism that highlight the suffering and the innocence and the silent endurance of the servant Messiah, which the New Testament interprets as a prophecy of Yeshua's sacrificial death. And in verse 7, it says that he was afflicted, he was oppressed, and he was afflicted, and yet he did not open his mouth. Okay, and that's what we see right here in these verses here. And where the word, this word nigas, okay, this word right here, it means that he was oppressed. Okay, so the word implies a sense of being driven or forced, indicating that the suffering servant's harsh treatment. And this word na'aneh means afflicted. Okay, and this suggests that he was humbled or bowed down, emphasizing the servant's submission to suffering. And we're told that the servant was, he did not open his mouth, right here. And this highlights that the servant's silent endurance, which is similar to a lamb being led to slaughter and doesn't know what's going on, right? And the verse continues, and it says that he was brought like a lamb to the slaughter, as a sheep before the shearers is dumb, he opened not his mouth. Okay, and that is what we read on the remainder of the text here on verse 7. And so the word kaseh right here, kaseh, meaning like a lamb. And this is a symbol of innocence and sacrifice. The lamb brought, it was brought to the slaughter, which underscores the innocence and the eventual end of the servant. And again, this reinforces this whole idea of the lamb that was that was brought to the altar, right? That it literally, it provides this imagery of innocence, that this of the servant's silent submission, meaning that he did not open his mouth. And in verse 8, we read that he was taken from oppression and from judgment, right here. Okay, from oppression and from judgment he was taken, and indicate that he was taken away in a state of oppression and judgment. This is exactly what happened with Yeshua. He was seized forcefully and he was judged unjustly. And the verse goes on and it says, "And who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off out of the land of the living. For the transgressions of my people was he stricken." Okay, so we got the rest of, just highlight all that. Okay, and so the text literally states he was cut off from the land of the living, right here. Being cut off from the land of the living. And this literally states that he was stricken, because of the transgression of my people. Okay, so the Hebrew text literally describes the purpose of the servant's suffering here in the Hebrew Bible, and his death, being taken from the land of the living, right? And it was for the transgressions of the people, right? That he was taken from the land of the living. And this indicates that he was put to death for someone else's sins, or for the people's sins, right? And so the verse in Isaiah 53 verse 9, it speaks then to the innocence of the Messiah and the place of his death, that he would be placed with the rich right here, right? And when we talk about his burial was with the rich, okay, the wealthy. And this indicates that he, what we read in the text of Joseph of Arimathea, he was a rich man who was a disciple of Yeshua, provided a tomb for Yeshua, right? And we read that in Matthew 27 and Mark 15 and Luke 23 and John 19. It's all in all four Gospels. And so these passages, they collectively highlight Joseph's role in Yeshua's burial, which is consistent with this prophetic text regarding the servant being laid with the rich in his death. Okay, so we note that there are New Testament parallels to these things. For example, in Matthew 26, verse 62 to 63, we were told that Yeshua remained silent before the high priest, fulfilling the prophecy of not opening his mouth. He'd also remained silent before Pontius Pilate, right? In Matthew 27, 12 to 14, it says, Yeshua did not respond to the accusations before Pilate. Again, that reflects the silent suffering servant, right, that we see here in the text. We were provided an ancient first century interpretation of these verses from Isaiah 53 by Philip in Acts chapter 8, verses 32 to 35. Remember, he met the Ethiopian eunuch, and he says that he asked the eunuch, because he went up next to the carriage that he was riding on, and he heard him reading from Isaiah 53, and he said, "Do you know what who that's speaking of?" And he goes, "How can I know unless someone tells me?" And then he got up into the carriage or whatever he was riding, and Philip explained to him that these passages here refer to Yeshua, the suffering servant. And so again, Acts chapter 8, we have a first century interpretation of these verses. And Peter, in his epistle, he wrote in 1 Peter 2:23 that Yeshua was silent and endured suffering, again interpreting Isaiah 53 and paralleling Isaiah's description of the servant. And we note again how this phrase, the et doro, okay, this one right here, okay, that refers to his generation, okay, so which directs us to the idea of Yeshua suffering being a generational sacrifice, atoning for the sins of the future generations. And so this is how this is interpreted in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and 1 Peter chapter 2. So these features in the Hebrew text of Isaiah 53, 7-9 contribute to the deep theological themes of sacrifice, suffering, and humility and atonement, which are central to the New Testament understanding of Yeshua's death and his resurrection. The New Testament consistently echoes and builds upon these themes, providing a rich tapestry of meaning and application for believers today. Okay, so now let's look at the next set of verses here, verse 10 through 12. Okay, so it says, V'Adonai chafetz dako hecheli im tasim asham nafsho yire zera ya'arich yamim v'chafetz Adonai beyado tzilach. Okay, so the Lord was pleased to crush him, putting him to death. If he would render himself as a guilt offering, he will see his offspring who will prolong his days. Okay, in verse 11 it says, Me'amal nafsho yira yisba bedato yatzdik tzadik avdi laravim ve'avonotam hu yisbol. Okay, and so as a result of the anguish of his soul, we will see it and be satisfied by his understanding or his knowledge of the righteous one. My servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Okay, and literally, he will carry their iniquities right here. And then in verse 12, it says, Lachen achalek lo barabim ve'et atzumim yachalek shalal tachat asher he'era lemavet nafsho ve'et poshim nimna vehu chet rabim nasa velaposhim yafkia. Okay, and therefore I will give him a portion of the great, and he will divide the booty of the strong, because he poured himself out to death. He poured himself into death and was numbered with the transgressors, and he himself bore the sin of many. Right here, he himself bore the sin of many, and interceded for the transgressors. Okay. Okay, so Isaiah continues in verses 10 through 12 here to speak of the servant Messiah's suffering and the travail of his soul and the grief, and then the glorification by God our Father in heaven due to Yeshua, to the servant's faithfulness. And so there are several noteworthy aspects about the Hebrew text. In verse 10, we read how it pleased the Lord to strike him, right? It pleased the Lord to strike him. And the word chafetz was pleased, right? And so this indicates that it was God's will or desire for things to happen to them, for these things to happen to the Messiah. And again, this highlights the sovereignty of God overall, right? And God's choice in the suffering servant. And the word dako right here, this word dako means to crush him, and implies this severe affliction and suffering. And the verb hecheli, this verb right next to it, it comes from the root word to be sick or to be afflicted, because for like illness, to be sick. So this word play emphasizes the intensity of the servant's suffering and the intentional infliction of pain. And then in verse 10, we read, it continues, and it says, when you make his soul an offering for sin. And again, that is right here. And so that you note the word asham for the guilt offering, right? The asham korban here. And this idea of the asham, the guilt, right, in his nafsho, his soul, right? These words speak to the sacrificial offering for guilt and atonement and references to servant's life or being, right? Being his soul, right? And so the remainder of the verse then goes on, and it says that he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord will prosper in his hand. Okay, so the word yira, he will see, suggests a foreknowledge, okay? And then, so we got right here, yire is this foreknowledge of the zera, right, of the seed, right, and or offspring or descendants or spiritual progeny. Okay, that's what I was thinking when I was looking at this. And so this speaks to the works of righteousness that he is doing for future generations. And again, this is a very rabbinic concept of works of righteousness, ma'asim tzedakah, right, or ma'aseh tzedakah. And this is deeply rooted in the Jewish tradition and is often associated with acts of charity and justice and moral behavior. So these works are seen as essential not only for the individual's spiritual well-being, but also for the benefit of future generations. And if we look at the rabbinic texts to understand this a little further, in the Talmud, for example, in Sota 14a, it states that the acts of righteousness are not only beneficial in the present, but also set a moral example for future generations to follow. And again, this emphasizes the importance of righteousness and charity. And the text suggests that these acts, they have a lasting impact, influencing not only the immediate community, but also future generations. And the concept of zekut, this means merit, is often linked to works of righteousness in the rabbinic mindset. And so the idea is that the merit accrued from righteous deeds can benefit one's descendants. And this is discussed in various rabbinic texts, including the Midrash and the Talmudic literature. And so the servant Messiah here is living out this concept, and that these scriptures suggest that it is for future generations that he is suffering for the forgiveness of sins. And in fact, that I would go as far as to say for the future, present, and past generations. Okay, because remember, Job said, I see the day of my Redeemer, right? So Job saw prophetically, right, the coming Messiah, right? And so again, I believe that these concepts, this is how these concepts follow through to what Yeshua had done as the Messiah of God for his people. And so I want to look at how this concept of works of righteousness on future generations is understood, And so, for example, the moral example, okay, and acts of righteousness set a moral example for future generations. When children and young people observe acts of kindness and charity and justice, they're more likely to emulate these behaviors in their own lives, and especially if we're raising our kids to do these things, right? And so this creates a cycle of positive behavior that can continue through generations, right? And again, spiritual merit, in Jewish tradition, the concept of zekut, which merit suggests that the good deeds performed by an individual can benefit their descendants, and this merit can bring blessing and protection to future generations. That's discussed in various rabbinic texts. Now, the community strength and acts of righteousness can contribute to the overall well-being and strength of the community. And a strong ethical community provides a supportive environment for future generations, to our kids to grow up in, and fosters growth and development, positive growth and positive development, right? Unlike what we see going on in the world today. And then divine favor. And many rabbinic sources suggest that the acts of righteousness attract divine favor, and this favor can extend to future generations, ensuring their prosperity and well-being. And then legacy of values. By engaging in righteous acts, individuals can leave behind a legacy of values and principles that their kids will remember, right? And this legacy can be a light for future generations and helping navigate through moral and ethical dilemmas. Okay, so it doesn't matter what happens to us, that, or what people do to us, that we trust in the Lord and we trust in Yeshua, right? And we continue to live our lives for the Lord. We don't stop living for the Lord just when the first bad thing starts, it comes and happens to us. In fact, once we become believers, the life can get very difficult because now the enemy is attacking us because of our faith in what we believe and this spiritual transformation that God is making in our lives. And what it is that the enemy is attempting to side or to derail that. And so we have to be strong to continue in the faith and to continue to persevere and to continue to seek God, our Father in heaven, the God of Israel, right? And in and through his Messiah, Yeshua, right? So again, these things emphasize how living our lives for God by the example of his servant Messiah can have a lasting influence and a lasting significance in our families, in our communities, and for future generations to come. Okay, so this is the emphasis of these words here in the Isaiah text. If it comes back to it, it's slow. Okay, of Ya'arich Yamim, of the extending of the days, right? The extending of the days, the prolonging of the days. This speaks of a long life. Creating a legacy, because we are walking in righteousness. We're trying to live our lives for the glory of God. Okay. And then verse 11, it goes on and it says that he shall see the travail of his soul and be satisfied. Okay. And with the word me'amal here, okay, this word me'amal, it refers to labor, and it is a reference to his toil or his travailing through suffering. And the word yishba right here means will be satisfied. It indicates a fulfillment or a contentment, as if there is satisfaction in suffering for righteousness' sake. We note how this is one of the Beatitudes that Yeshua taught according to Matthew chapter 5. When we are persecuted for righteousness' sake, there is a sense of peace because we are doing what is right and true and not giving in to unrighteousness and sin. Isaiah, he goes on and he says, by his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Again, and it speaks to the his knowledge here, okay, that of understanding or awareness, right? And we note how the word, these two words, yatzdik tzaddik, okay, yatzdik tzaddik, it refers to, is a repetition, right? And it's referencing to servants' moral integrity and righteousness, that he will justify or make righteous, vindicate, right? Vindicate many. Okay, so this is how the servant's sacrifice will lead to the righteousness of many who believe, indicating the servant's impact on a multitude. And then Isaiah 11 here speaks exactly saying that it is for our iniquities, right? Their sins or transgressions of many, the suffering is occurring, right? And again, the word, we see that it is for their iniquities. He will carry their iniquities, right? He will bear their iniquities. And this indicates that the servant will carry or bear or endure suffering due to the iniquity of many. Okay. So in verse 12, then we read, it states that therefore will I divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he has poured out his soul unto death, and he is numbered with the transgressors, and he bare the sin of many, and made intercession for transgressions. Okay, so basically, we're talking about the whole verse here. So we note that the phrase, I will divide him a portion with the great, is interpreted as referring to Yeshua's exaltation and reward after his resurrection. And in Philippians 2:9 verse through 11, speaks of God highly exalting Yeshua and giving him a name above every name, which aligns with this idea of being given a portion with the great. In addition, the phrase, and he shall divide the strong spoil, the word for strong and mighty and spoil and booty indicates the servant's victory over sin and death, as well as sharing of blessings with others. So we note how consistent these verses are with the New Testament text. We note the following verses. So let's look at these verses here. And so we see in Matthew 20 verse 8, 20 verse 28, Yeshua speaks of giving his life as a ransom for many, paralleling the servant's role in bearing the iniquity of many, as we see in Isaiah 53. In Matthew 26:28, it says Yeshua refers to his blood being poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins, echoing the servant's atoning sacrifice, according to Isaiah 53. Romans 5:18 and 19, Paul discusses how one man's obedience, Yeshua, right, will make many righteous, reflecting the servant's role in justifying many, like what we read here in Isaiah 53. And then lastly, 1 Peter 2:24, Peter describes Yeshua as bearing our sins in his body on the cross, directly paralleling the servant bearing the iniquities of many. Okay, so these verses from Isaiah 53:10-12 highlight the servant suffering, atonement, and ultimate vindication, in which Isaiah 53 may be interpreted to be foretelling. The New Testament text references further, and it further reinforces these things, okay, this interpretation and this connection, showing how Yeshua's life and actions fulfilled these ancient prophecies. We note how Yeshua's life and actions, they literally fulfilled these prophecies. And note also that someone may state that a faithful God would certainly not visit bad things on innocent people. I've heard that before. The question is, would he really? Right? And so we do have a biblical example in the life of Job to take as an example to say, yes, that the great creator God would visit bad things if it resulted in a greater good. Okay, so we note the salvation that has come to both the Jew and the Gentile for the glory of God in the suffering of the servant King Messiah. And this is why it was God's plan for the suffering servant to come first, to put away sin and lead all peoples in the righteousness of God. This is what Yeshua does according to the Isaiah text, and that he was innocent, that he laid his life down. He was silent. He was given a grave that meant that he laid down with the wealthy, with the rich, Joseph of Arimathea, and that the purpose for his death was due to the sins of the people, right? Of people, our sins and so forth. So, all of these things, they illustrate how God has a plan, right? He had a plan far back as Isaiah. He had a plan from the very beginning. And so, what a wonderful God we serve, right? What a wonderful God we serve. Okay, so that's what I had for Isaiah 53, verses 7-12. Next, let's look at the rabbinic text and look closer at the Targum Jonathan and see what it has to say. Okay, thanks for listening.